everyone, this is Miss Brubeck. We are doing notes on what a function is today, and so you need to type what I have here in red, or if you're writing it on paper, then make sure you write it on paper. But a function is a math relationship in which every input has exactly one output. And I'll show you what I mean by that as we go through this. So you want to think of a function as a vending machine. A vending machine, you put money in and you get one thing out. Okay, so we're going to think of this as our input is the money we put in. Okay, so we put in money. Oops. Input is our money that we put in. So maybe you put in, 50 cents. The output is what you get out, like the snack you get. So the output equals your snack. Maybe you get chips or a soda or a candy. That's your output. So your input is the money that you put in, and the output is your snack. Okay? What normally happens is you only get out one thing in a vending machine. Now, sometimes you get lucky and two things come out, but that's not how a vending machine is supposed to work. Okay? The way a vending machine is supposed to work is that you put in money and only one thing comes out. That is why a vending machine is an example of a function. Because remember, a function means that for every input, it has exactly one output. For every input, it has exactly one output. So when you put in money, you should be getting out only one thing if a vending machine works the way it's supposed to work. When you put in money, you should only be getting out one thing if the vending machine is working properly. And so when we're talking about what a function looks like in terms of numbers, we often use a function machine, kind of like how I just used the vending machine to explain what a function is. So I'm going to show you what a function is and what a function is not. An example of a function would be, let's say I have the number 5, and I'm just picking the number 5 at random. Okay, if I put in the number 5 and I get out the number 1, and then you go to the machine and you put in the number 5 and you get out the number 1, and then maybe someone else in our class puts in the number 5 and gets out the number 1, every time we're getting the same thing, then that's a function. Okay, but let's say I put in the number 5 and I get out the number 1, but then you go up to the machine and you put in the number 5 and you get out the number 2, and then somebody else goes up and puts in a 5 and gets out a 10, well, that's not a function. That is not a function. A function means that every time you have an input, you should only get one thing out. So remember, a function is every time you have an input, only one thing should come out. Every time you input a number, only one thing should come out. Now, if we look at more examples of this, like here, you want to think of the x as your input, and you want to think of the y as your output. That's always how it's going to be. It's never going to switch on you. The x is always going to be your input. The y is always going to be your output. Okay? So if we plug these numbers in, we're trying to figure out, is it a function? Well, if we plug in the number, the -2, we're only going to get out one number, a -1. That so far looks like a function. And then if we do we plug in the -1, we put the -1, we put that into our machine, we get out a +2. Again, looks like a function. We're only getting out one output per number. Then if we put in the 0, we're getting out the -1. Again, looks like a function. Each time we're doing this, we're only getting out one number, which is the way it's supposed to work. And if you look, you can see, okay, if we put in the 1, we're going to get out one number, the 8, and the same thing's going to happen when you do the 2 and the 3. So this is a function because every input has exactly one output. This is a function because every input has exactly one output. Moving on to the next slide. Same idea here, the X is our input, the Y is our output. And if you look here where you see the number 4, you're going to see the number 4 right here. And you're going to see the number 4 again right here. So if we go up to that machine and we put in the number 4, and let's say I get out the number 1, but then later you go up to the machine and you put in the number 4 and you get out the number 3, well then that is not a function. This is not a function because 4 has 2 outputs. And if I'm going too fast for you, that's why you can pause the video. I don't want to make really long videos, so pause it if I'm going too fast. I didn't mean to get rid of that one over here. Then if you look at the right side, again, your X is your input and your Y is your output. And you're going to notice that there's 2 5s. So there's a 5 here, and it has an output of 0. And there is a 5 here. It also has an output of 0. So the question is this a function? We're putting in the number 5. Let's say I put in the number 5, I get out a 0. Then you go back up to the machine, you put in the number 5, and you get out a 0. Is that a function? This is a function because the 5 has only one output. So that is a function because the 5 has only one output. I'm going to move on to the next slide. If I'm going too fast, just pause. This time we're going to look at some images. So we're going to try to figure out, is this graph down here, is that blue graph a function? And there's a really easy way to do this. We use something called the vertical line test. And the way the vertical line test works is we draw a vertical line, and a vertical line is a line that goes up and down. So we draw a vertical line through our graph. If the line only hits our graph once, then it is a function. So looking at the one down here, no matter where I draw a straight vertical line, no matter where I draw it, it's only going to hit that blue graph one time. So this is a function because the vertical lines only hit the graph once. Excuse me. And again, if I'm going too fast, pause the video. Moving on to the next slide. We've got 2 more graphs here. Now the one on the top's a little tricky because if you draw a vertical line here, it only hits the blue graph once. And if you draw a vertical line here, it only hits the blue graph once. You might be thinking, okay, this is definitely a function. But you got to draw vertical lines everywhere because if I draw one right here, it hits my blue graph 1, 2, 3 times. And if I draw a vertical line here, it also hits my blue graph 3 times. So this is not a function because the vertical line hits the graph more than once. Then looking at the one on the bottom, it doesn't matter where we draw the vertical line, it's only going to hit that curved graph once. So this is a function because the vertical line only hits the graph once. So again, you might need to pause the video to make sure you can get this down. I'm going to move on to the next slide. On this one, it's the same idea. We've got our inputs and our outputs, and we just need to figure out is this a function. So as you can see, we've got these lines, and so this shows us that the 10 here only has one output, and that number is 15. So when you put in the number 10 it only has one output, and that output is 15. So far it looks like a function. Then if you look at the number 20, the arrow only goes to one number. So it again is looking like it's going to be a function. When you put in the number 20, you're only getting out one number of 45. And as long as the numbers only point to one other number, it's going to be a function. So 30 only has one output. The number is 25. And then the 40 only has one output, and that number is 35. So this is a function because every input only has one output. This is a function because every input only has one output. Again, I'm going to go to the next slide, so if I'm going too fast, go ahead and pause the video. Here, same idea. You can pretty quickly tell if these are functions because if we look at the number 2, the input is 2, but it has an output of 20 and it has an output of 40. It has two outputs. So we have the number 2 here. It has an output of 20 and an output of 40. We know that a function can only have one output. This one has 2. So this is not a function because the 2 has 2 outputs. Number 3 is pretty easy to look at, or pretty easy to tell as well. I'm going to try to put another function machine down here. So if we look at the number 3, look at all those outputs. It goes to the number 0, it goes to the number 2, it goes to the number 4, and it has an output of 6. So when we input the number 3, we're going to have an output of 0. We're going to have an output of 2. We're going to have an output of 4 and an output of 6. So this is definitely not a function because it has 4 outputs. And as we know, a function can only have one output. So this is not a function because 3 has 4 outputs. Again, if I'm going too fast, pause the video because I am going to go to the next slide. So these are the same ideas. The next few examples are the same idea, but now what we're dealing with are just points. So remember, what we have here is, and you know this, x, comma, y, okay? X, comma, y. The x always goes first, and the y goes second. So this isn't new information for you. You know that the x goes first, the y is second. But what might be new is that our input, x is our input, y is our output. Okay, and that's always going to be true. So if you look at this one right here, the number, if we see this and this with the 1, so we've got a 1, and when you input 1, you're going to get -2 as an output, and you're going to get +3 as an output. So this is not a function because the 1 has 2 outputs. And as we know, it can only have one output. You can do the same thing for example 2. We have, x comma y. And remember, the x is your input, the y is your output, and you need to figure out, okay, is this a function? This is a function because every number that you put in has only one output. Every input has exactly one output. So again, if I'm going too fast, pause this because I'm moving on to the next and final slide. Looking at this one, we can see here that it's pretty fast. You can see it pretty fast. We got the -2 and a -2. So when we put in the -2, we get out 2 numbers. We get out a -1 and we get out a 3. So this is not a function because the -2 has 2 outputs.